Okay, so we all had the 4931 Advising 1 during Senior Design 1, right? That was the one where we were trying to bring in a couple of industry professionals, a couple of alumni, things like that, and talk to all of you about, just kind of professional career path. And I have three particular topics that I want to talk to you all about in three successive lectures. This will be the first of the three. This really is not specifically information that is pertinent and germane to I would say, just engineers. This is really something that I think is appropriate. Most of it is appropriate to all professionals and also to I would say to all college graduates. Give me 1 second. Working on trying to get my computer to actually duplicate. There we go. Okay. All right. So the three discussions that we're going to do, one of them, the first one that we're going to do today, is we're going to discuss Social Security, how it's calculated, and why it is relevant to you all as young professionals. The second one we're going to cover briefly is going to be on taxes. I think that is an important conversation for you all as you get ready to go out and start your professional careers and actually start earning enough money where some of your decisions and choices are going to have substantial or could have substantial impact on your professional lives. And the third discussion that we're going to have, and I honestly think that third discussion is probably the most important information that I could pass on to any graduating senior, any college graduate. I think it's more important than any lecture in any technical course in terms of the impact that it can and will have on your professional lives. So these are all like common sense things. I wish that these were taught, in like financial awareness and things like that. But I honestly think that in the university environment, we focus way too much on the technical preparation aspects of your career, making sure that you're experts at thermodynamics or vibrations or solid mechanics or design. And we focus a little less important, or we put a little less emphasis on kind of the holistic things that are going to make you kind of happy, well-adjusted professionals that will let you make sensible decisions in your professional careers. So some of this stuff is finance, and I would say it's important, and it has an impact on maybe some of your professional choices or freedoms in your professional choices. In other words, if you're aware of some of these principles, if you're aware of some of the concepts, then at some point in your professional career, you may want to make a career change to a different kind of engineering. You may want to go do philanthropic work, whatever the case may be. And if you're aware of some of this stuff and you make some sensible decisions early on in your life, you may have those freedoms later. If you don't, then perhaps you won't. So I would say that this is some really basic information, but I would say in terms of the potential impact on your lives, this is profound, in my opinion. It's very, very profound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare three different professions. Now I'm going to do this, and you see down here I've got Microsoft Excel open. Let me go ahead and turn the lights down so you guys have a little better contrast so you can see this. If you're in the back and you can't see the numbers or whatever the case may be, either move up, ask me to zoom, whatever the case may be. Down here I have three tabs. All right, these three tabs represent three different types of professional employment. One of them is what I have called fast food. One of them is what I have called teacher, and one of them is what I've called engineer. Now, I've chosen these as kind of case study jobs. Fast food being obviously a relatively low wage kind of employment. Teacher, I would call a middle wage income, and engineer ultimately will be an upper middle class income. Now, once upon a time, I joked about this fast food thing, and I said something about somebody being a McWorker, right? And I had a student who was in the class that semester say that I was like, insulting an entire class of people, who do that kind of job for a living. So let me correct that right off the bat in case I actually, accidentally say something during the lecture. When I put fast food down here and I talk about it, I am a former employee of not one, but two different Taco Bells. I have done that job. I know exactly what it's like. I can only imagine trying to work your way through an entire adult life on that kind of wage income. It's not easy. And so I don't in any way want to demean or belittle the people that are working at that wage class. I'm simply using it as a baseline for the conversation so that you guys understand kind of where we're coming from. All right, because your professional career as engineers, your finance situation will be substantially different from that. All right, so what I've done is I've gone here and I've used some basic information, and what I've said is we're gonna make some assumptions of a fast food worker's wage. And we're gonna make an assumption. This is a gross assumption. I'm gonna make a lot of very broad sweeping assumptions, and I'll ask you to just work with me here. I've made an assumption of a starting annual salary. I've made an assumption that this person can get 2,000 hours a year. We know that that's frequently not the case. There are some people who work part-time. There are some people who work more than one job of this kind and do manage to get more than 40 hours a week. I'm not trying to dig into the nuances of that. I'm just going to say, let's basically assume that the person makes X amount of dollars, $8+ an hour, and makes 2,000, gets 2,000 hours a year, a full-time 40-hour-a-week job. I'm going to make an assumption here on this person's annual raises that for some period of time, this person is going to get an annual raise of perhaps 2.5%. And then at some point in time, their salary is saturated. There comes a point in time where no one will pay someone, more than a top-level wage. There's a ceiling here. And so then what I'm doing is making an assumption that this person will get something in the coming years, but it won't be the continued, sharp-ish slope that 2.5% would yield. So it's going to be a basic 2.5, and then after, I think I put a decade in here, whatever the case may be, I said that it starts to flatten out and they get a 2.1. All right. I also assumed that inflation, annual inflation, would be 2%. That means when you buy a Coca-Cola today, a year from now, that Coca-Cola will cost $1.02, right? Or what you can buy with $1 today, the buying power of the dollar slowly erodes over time. So with those basic assumptions, and those will vary as I move on to the other job categories, but what I've done is I've generated a column, a series of columns. And if you look over here in the column A, you have the year, 2019. And we're going to use a case study of a person, a young worker in this particular area, who's of age 22. And that person is going to work until age 67. So this column is years to retirement. That's column C, years to retirement. And we're going to say that in this current year, this person makes this amount of money, et cetera, et cetera. They get an annual raise. There's your 2.5%, right? 102.5% represented as a decimal. They have a monthly wage. All right. Now, when we do this, I need to explain this column. I need to explain this column. So what this column represents is a scenario where if I earn $1 today, and I fast forward off into the future, given my wage, if you will, this is essentially the buying power of $1 this many years off in the future. All right, this represents compound inflation for 45 years. So if I make the assumption that what costs $1 today will cost $1.02 next year, multiplying by 1.02, then in 2021, we have to multiply by 1.02 again. The following year, 1.02. Each successive year, we're multiplying by 1.02. And what that means is that for the next 45 years, each passing year, what costs $1 today is $1.02, is $1.04 something, et cetera, et cetera. Eventually, what winds up happening is 45 years from now, that compounded or exponential development, that series, if you will, is $1 multiplied by 1.02 raised to the 45th power. Any questions on that? Everybody got it? Go ahead. Got it? Yeah, I'm sorry. So what I'm doing is I'm saying something that costs $1 now will cost $2.43 45 years from now. So you can think about it either way. You can say what costs $1 costs $2.43, or you can divide by the compounding and say that $1 is worth like 40 cents. You can think about it either way. So if you buy a Coca-Cola today, a 2% inflation says that 45 years from now, that Coca-Cola will cost $2.43. That's what that multiplier represents. And so when we do that, we say that if this person had a monthly income here and the multiplier of dollars based on inflation, based on that cost increase, what this says is that 45 years from now, this person's wage, right, based on this, 45 years from now, this wage today multiplied by the 45 years of compounding inflation is approximately $3,600 a month. That's what it would require to equal the same kind of buying power. Now, somewhere along the way, what I'm going to do, what I'm looking at, is a scenario where we need to talk about what Social Security contribution. This calculation is a starting point for discussing Social Security contributions. Most of you who have had an hourly job recognize that somebody pulls money out of your paycheck every week. And one of those withdrawals out of your paycheck runs at about 6.2% of your gross wages. That withdrawal, that 6.2% of your gross wages, is a Social Security, it's essentially a tax, if you will. It's a payroll tax. What you probably don't know, unless you've owned a business or worked on the payroll side, is that when your employer pulls that money out of your paycheck, that's 6.2% of your hourly wage, and sends it off to the Social Security Administration, they are also matching with another 6.2% out of their pocket. Your employer pays that as part of their payroll activity. So there is a total of 12.4% of your paycheck every week, every month, whatever the case may be, that gets sent off to the Social Security Administration. So all that I'm doing is I'm saying that if somebody were earning $17,680 a year, 12.4% of their paycheck, 12.4% of their paycheck, their employee part and their employer part is here at about $2,200. So in a year, that's how much Social Security would receive for this person. Yes? The 6.2% is the Social Security taxation rate. It's built in federal law, et cetera, et cetera. It's standard for everybody who's earning a W-2 or a hourly based wage up to some certain thresholds. So 6.2 is, if you've ever held a job, and if you go back and look at your pay stubs, you'll see that 6.2% is pulled out for Social Security. All right, all this represents is that $2,200 multiplied out 45 years. So what comes out of this person's paycheck in 2019, the $2,200, somewhere down the road, we're going to multiply by this 2.43, and we're going to say that if you wanted to counterbalance inflation, this is what it would be 45 years from now. Fair enough? Okay. I think I did it. There's a slight variation in that calculation. It's not perfect, but it's good enough for the conversation. All right. So all that I did is I took this line, and when you go down and look, you'll see that each year that goes by, the person gets a year older. Each year that goes by, there is one fewer years to graduation. Each year that goes by, their salary goes up a little bit, their monthly wage goes up. The multiplier goes down because there are fewer years in that exponential term, okay? And if you look here, what winds up happening is the wage is going up, the multiplier is going down. The net result, because the wage is going up slightly more than inflation, the retirement year value actually goes up ever so slightly for this person. We're going to see it evolve when we go to the other category. And here's what's going to happen. We're going to go out here and we can go down all these years and we can go look and see that when this person turns 67, right? We can go back and look at what their annual wage is. We can see that they're still getting that 2.1%, et cetera, et cetera. And here's a very important point for consideration. I'm going to go here and I'm going to look at this person's monthly wage, and I'm going to look at their best 35 years worth of monthly wage. Now, in this case, obviously, it's the last 35 years. And what we're going to do is we're going to take an average indexed monthly earning. All right, so we're indexing it for inflation. That's a very important point. It's not $2019 45 years later. It's $2019 multiplied by that multiplier of 45 years worth of inflation. Everybody clear on that? So we're using the indexed value, the inflation indexed value. And all we're doing is we're going back and we're saying over the 35 years that this person earned the most money, their average monthly income during those best 35 years is about $3,900. Are we clear? Does that calculation make sense to everybody? Any questions? All right, so I'm going to go a little bit faster. The point here is that I'm going to go over here and I'm going to look at two different calculations. Here's what Social Security does. By its very definition, Social Security is inflation, it is wage adjusted. It is means tested. And what that means is that if this person earned about $3,900 for their wage, the first $926 of that, Social Security is going to replace 90% of that. So for somebody who is a very low wage earner, all right, today, if that person were earning here, if that person were earning $1,500 a month right here, this year, 2019, and that person just retired, Social Security is going to look at that monthly income of about $1,500. And what they're going to do is say, all right, for the first $926 of that, we're going to replace 90% of that. So we're going to take 926 multiplied by 0.9. And if that monthly amount is over 926, we're going to give you not 90% of the amount over 926, but 32% of the amount over 926. So the line goes up, and there's a bend point, which is $926. And anything up to 926, you get 90% of it. Anything in the next range, which is between 926 and about 5583, you get 32% of that. Anything over the 5583, you get 15%. So it's a declining, diminishing return situation. The line has this, this, and this. Yes, sir? Get. So Social Security is essentially insurance against poverty, for lack of a better way to describe it. Social Security is not a pension. It is I hate to use this word, but it is an entitlement. It is something that a wage earner in the United States has paid taxes into the system for their life. And when they meet the minimum retirement ages and things like that, they will actually receive a payment from Social Security. And it's essentially an insurance policy. Your 6.2% that comes out of your paycheck every week or every 2 weeks or whatever is you're essentially buying an insurance policy. And it's insurance against poverty, et cetera, et cetera. So when this person retires at age 67 and they file their paperwork with the Social Security Administration to start receiving the benefit from the insurance policy that they have essentially purchased over their working life, Social Security is going to do a calculation like this, and they're going to say, okay, there's two bend points. Those bend points today are 926 and 5583. And so what they're going to do is they're going to say 926, 5583. Where is your best 35 years average monthly income? Is it below 926? No problem. Your pension benefit or your payout benefit, it's not a pension, but your monthly benefit is going to be 90% because your average was only $800 over your best 35 years. If you fall into the middle range where your average monthly income is above 926 but below 5583, you get 90% of the bottom chunk, and you get 32% of wherever you penetrate into that second range. Okay? If you get above the second bend point, if you're in the top tier, you get 90% of the bottom range, 32% of the middle range, and 15% of wherever you are in the top range. In other words, it is a case of diminishing returns the higher a wage earner you are. It is absolutely means tested. Yes, sir.
So those numbers, 1960, are they fixed or that depends on?
That is an excellent question. So they are not fixed. Those are the 2019 numbers, and what I have done over here in this column is I've adjusted them using that inflation multiplier. So 45 years off into the future, and again, this is a gross assumption, right? So those numbers are adjusted every year. They're adjusted by a particular formula that we don't have time to get into. But the point is that 45 years from now, if it were just based purely on a 2% compounding inflation, the first bend point would be 2257. And the second bend point would be 13,000 and change. Now, this person, we said that their best 35 years, highest 35 years, average indexed monthly earnings came out to about $3,900. So they're above the bottom bend point. So they're going to get 90% of 2257. All right? The first bracket, so 90% of 2257, they're going to get that. They're going to get a little over $2,000. Now, what we do is we say, okay, they're at $3,900. They're penetrated above that by about, $1,700, something in that ballpark. So they're going to get 32% of that next range. That constitutes another $515. Makes sense? 90% of 2257 plus 32% of the difference between 2257 and their average index monthly earnings. Yes, sir. The multiplier is important because they're going to look at each person's average index monthly earnings. They're going to see where you fall into that 3-band scenario. And if you're in the bottom band, you get 90% of your average index monthly earnings. If you're in the middle band, you get 90% of the base band plus 32% of wherever you penetrate into the second band. No. The multiplier is fixed and constant as a matter of law. It's a replacement cost component.
I mean the multiplier that you're giving to the monthly wage. So they're not averaging your best 35 years as earned. It's accounting for inflation.
Yes. So your question is, okay, so what they're doing is they're going to take your entire life, your annual income, and wherever it falls, be it year, age 22 or age 45 or age 62, they're going to, when you file, they're going to go through that indexing process where they track it for inflation. So 45 years from now, whatever the year is, 45 years from now, when that person files, they're going to take, the 2019 numbers and carry them forward into then present value dollars. That's called the indexing process. They're going to take all your entire working life, carry every year forward, index every year, look at the best 35 years, and figure out what your average monthly income was for those best 35 years. That's the average indexed monthly earning, AIME. They're going to take that and they're going to see where you fall on the band. Fair? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
So if you had multiple part-time jobs at McDonald's and stuff, does it take each of those separately and look at them?
So yeah, that's a very good question. So for the purposes of me recording this, your question was about multiple part-time jobs. The good news is that it's all wage-based jobs for the year. So if you worked for 2 months, quit, started another job, worked for a month, quit, and then started 5 jobs all within the same calendar year, it doesn't matter. It's looking at that snapshot for you personally for a year. So it's the sum total snapshot of each person for 2019, whether it's one job for 40 hours a week or 4 jobs that are 10 hours each apiece. It doesn't matter. It's for the year. Okay. I'm just watching the clock because we're going to run out of time. So this person's sum total here, 2031 plus 515, means that 45 years from now or 40, whatever, however many years from now, this person's money, Their benefit, primary benefit, would be about 2547. Now, if we divide backwards, what is that today? Right? If we pull out that inflation factor, that number is a little over $1,000. Remember, this is a person who's earning like $1,500 a month. Okay? And if we bring it back to 2019 dollars, that's a little over $1,000. I want you to recognize that the indexing process says that this will replace about 64% of this person's monthly earnings. So this is a wage replacement calculation that I am showing you. This person who works in a fast food scenario or in a comparable wage-based scenario will have 64% of their benefit, of their wage replaced. Yes? Of where they are today, right? So if you look at where this person is, they can reasonably expect to have about 2/3 of their wage replaced. I want you to think about what that means for this person's standard of living. Somebody who's working in a fast food restaurant 40 hours a week and then retires, working 40 hours a week in a fast food restaurant, you're not really doing, this is not a high standard of living. And when you retire, 1/3 of your paycheck goes away. You're down to 2/3 of that. Now, I need to fast forward because we've only got about 20 minutes. I'm going to move to the second scenario. This will be much faster because we've walked through the calculations once already. I'm going to look at somebody who's a teacher. We're going to make the assumption that this person has a starting salary of $30,000, and their skills are slightly more in demand. Obviously, they're a teacher. They have skills. They have education. They have training. They have something to offer that's going to mean that over time, their wages are not going to plateau in quite the same way as a lower skilled worker would. So I've made the assumption that this person's annual raise is 2.5%, and then it tapers a little bit down to 2.25% after some period of time. I think I put it in there for a decade. So also this person has the same inflation assumption, et cetera, et cetera. So we see 2019, age 22, 45 years to retirement, average salary. You can see the raises being applied, their annual income going up, all right? You can see what that person's monthly income is. The same multiplier, the 2.43, is sitting there. And we can do the exact same computation and look at 45 years of this, let's say, public school teachers' wages. We can index all of them forward in time for inflation to the day they retire. We can look at their best 45 years. We can look at the average monthly earnings after indexing for inflation for those 45 years. And when we get there, their best 35 years, their average index monthly earnings is about $6,700. Now, we're going to go over to that side calculation, and what we're going to do is this. Same bend points, right? Now, here's an issue. This person at 6,700 is above the second bend point. So here's what they have. Here's the first bend point adjusted for inflation. Here's the second point adjusted for inflation. I'm sorry, they're in the second range. So what they're going to get is they're going to get 90% of 2257. That's represented here by bracket 1, the 2031, $2,031. They're above 2257 but below 13.6. Here's their wage, their average index monthly earnings. So they're going to get 32% of the difference between 2257 and 6690. They're going to get 90% of the entire bottom band. They're going to get 32% of where they are penetrated into the second band. Right? So they're penetrated 67 minus 22, what is that, $4,500, somewhere in that ballpark. They're going to get 32% of $4,500, and there's their earnings right there. That's that number right there, bracket 2. They're in the middle of the second bracket. The sum total of that is 3,400 and change. If we divide out by 45 years of inflation and put it in today's dollars, it's about $1,400. And if we compare the $1,400 to the wage that they were earning, remember, $30,000 a year, $2,500 a month, this person is getting about half of their wage replaced. Okay? Let's do it one more time. I'm watching the clock. We're going to go over here and we're going to do this as an engineer. And we're going to go here and we're going to assume that this engineer starts at a salary of $65,000. We're going to make an assumption that this person gets an annual raise of 3%. And we're going to make an assumption that that 3% holds for their entire working life. This is a reality. Your raises as an engineer will not taper in the same way that somebody in public school teaching or in a lower skilled job like potential fast food worker, whatever the case may be. It's an inescapable fact. It's going to happen. Your wage raises are going to continue. So here's this salary. Here's the monthly salary, right? Here's that same multiplier, our friend, for inflation. And you can see the same calculation. We're going to go down here, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at this young engineer's best 35 years. Now, I want to be clear that this engineer, by the time they retire, are doing very well for themselves, right? Their quality of life, their standard of living has grown because their wage has increased over the years. And this person now, over the best 35 years, indexed forward to inflation into year 2064, right? Their best 35 years, average monthly salary is about $17,000. Now let's go back over here, excuse me. Sorry. We're going to go back over here and we're going to see that the same bend points are here. They've been indexed forward in time for inflation. And I want you to see that this engineer's salary is above the second bend point. This engineer they're not in the first bracket. They've completely gone all the way through the second bracket. They're now into the third bracket. So this person is going to get 90% of the entire first bracket. That's computed here. 90% of 2257 is 2,031. They're going to get 32% of the entire second bracket. And then they're going to get 15% of wherever they are above the second bend point. So their average monthly earnings is $17K. The second bend point indexed is 13. They're going to get 15% of about $4,000. That's represented right here, $382. Total at retirement is just over $6,000. If we divide out based on inflation, that compounded inflation, that's about $2,500 today. If you divide that into the person's wage, you'll see that Social Security is going to replace about 29% of their paycheck. In other words, for the lowest of wage employee, it was 64%. For a middle wage employee, it was 49%. For a high wage employee, it's going to be 29%. The person is getting more from Social Security, but it is representative of an ever decreasing percentage of their wage. Remember, this is inflation, this is insurance against poverty. This is not a pension that you're paying into, okay? So the idea here is that as somebody is a high wage earner, the expectation is they have a greater and greater capacity to take care of themselves on their own, and the federal government needs to have a diminishing and ever diminishing role in providing that insurance against poverty. So the point here is, what I want you guys, the point that I want to drive home is if you are in this third category, the assumption is you're going to do something to take care of yourselves, or you are going to go and have a crashing decrease in your standard of living. You guys understand that to go from 100% of your paycheck to 64% of your paycheck when you work in a fast food environment, you're not paying for commuting to work, maybe you don't have to buy clothes, whatever the case may be. The point is that maybe you can go from 100% to 64% and it's going to hurt, but it's not going to be crushing, right? If you're in a case of like a teacher, if you go from 100% to 49%, hey, guess what? most teachers have a pension that goes along with that, right? Just by the nature of the profession. When you are an engineer, you're going to go from 100% to 29.5%. You need to have your affairs in order, or that's all there's going to be. That's the point I'm trying to make. Your question, sir.
Percentage replacement salary that's based on last year.
I forget how I calculated. I think it is based on the final year. I think what I did is I based it on what the payment would be in that year, what the primary benefit amount would be in that year, and the wage in that year. So in other words, like how it would feel to you if you were in that situation. I think that's how I computed that. All right, there's one more point that I want to make. And I probably don't have time to get too deeply into the guts of it. But if you go out here and look in column J, where it talks about the retirement year value, what I've done is I've computed that if you were going to contribute X amount of dollars in 2019, and if we go forward in time and look at what the value of those dollars, what they would essentially turn into after 45 years, and then 44 years, and 43 years, and 42 years, et cetera, my question is, what is the total value of this first person, the lowest wage person, what is the total then year, future year value of their contributions? And the answer is it's a little over $300,000. Okay? And if we go back and we actually look and we say, okay, if this person's total contributions over the years were $300,000, and if you looked and said, okay, if you took that amount of money that they got, and if you looked at essentially I think it's this number, what the benefit, actually it's this number right here. If you looked at their benefit of $2,500 and you looked at that over a year, right? If you said, okay, 12 months times $2,500, they'd get about $30,000. Essentially what you could envision this. This isn't technically correct, so be cautious with this. But we're saying this person has paid or invested about $300,000, and every year their yield, if you will, is about 30 grand. Their 12 months of benefit. And what I'm saying is this would be the equivalent conceptually that this person is earning about a 9% yield, like an investment yield, if you will. They're earning about a 9% yield on the money that they've paid into Social Security over their entire lives. Are there any questions on that? Yes, sir.
Does that account for how much, for example, if you retire at 67?
Right.
You said that 9% is for 1 year. Let's say
Yeah.
68.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make a point, right? So in that year of retirement, if this person, if you take their contributions and index them forward in time, right, 45 years, this is the value of what they would have paid into the program. And in the year of retirement, right, if they're getting $2,547 a month, multiply that by the 12 months of that year, they would get a little over $30,000. I'm making the computation of that year, a little over $30,000 is what percentage of their total lifetime contribution? And the answer is it's about 9%, a little over 9%. Now, obviously, we would have to go forward and look at what happens over successive years, whether there's a cost of living adjustment. It becomes a very complex conversation. The point that I'm trying to make is that if you were having an investment conversation and saying that this person had saved $300,000+ for retirement, and their investment yielded $30,000, you would say that investment had yielded about 9%. That's the point that I'm trying to make. This is not correct, right? There's not an account. Let me finish the point because we're going to run out of time. All right. The point that I'm trying to make, and this is not a perfect scenario because there's no account anywhere with this person's name on it, right? The money has long since been absorbed into the entire administrative system. I want to make the exact same comparison for both other wage classes. that if you look at the teacher and you look at the retirement year value and you look at and you go down and calculate for 45 years of that person's contributions to Social Security, they will have contributed over $560,000. Obviously, their wage base is higher, 6.2%, or actually 12.4% of a higher wage is clearly a higher amount that they have paid into the system. This person will have paid $563,000. If you look at their monthly benefit, remember, it is a diminishing returns benefit, so you can reasonably expect that this person, even though their gross benefit is higher, it is a weighted average, it's a weighted diminishing return. And so when you take this person's overall benefit, their monthly benefit, which is right here, $3,450, multiply that by 12 months and you're going to get $35,000 or whatever it comes out to. And if you say, okay, what percentage of $563,000 is that? This person has invested or paid in 563 grand in that year of retirement, in the first year of their retirement. What's the yield? And the answer is it's about 7.3%. Okay? The conclusion that I would draw is that the teacher's participation in Social Security is a worse deal than the deal that the fast food worker is getting. In other words, because it's a flat 12.4% and the benefit you're getting back is being indexed based on the higher wage, this person, the teacher, is getting proportionately less money back than they paid in over the years. It's not as good a deal for them as it is for the lower wage worker. The point that I'm trying to make, the point that I'm trying to get to, is that the engineer has paid in more than $1.1 million into Social Security. Their benefit is sitting right here, okay, multiply by 12 months, and $6,000 times 12 months is $72,000 and change, maybe $73,000. And if you ask, what percentage of $1.1 million is the $73,000, the answer is the yield is 6.3%. In other words, the higher your wage base, the worse a deal, the worse of an investment, if you will, Social Security becomes. That's a point that I'm trying to make. So there's a lot of detail that we didn't even begin to cover. Social Security actually caps out at 100. The maximum that they actually tax you on today is $127,000. So if you make $127,000 today, they make the presumption that you don't need additional insurance against poverty. That seems reasonable to me, right? You'll see a lot of discussion that they want to talk about removing the cap and having people who make $300,000 pay into the system. Well, I want to be really clear that if we go back here and we change this and call this somebody who's, let's say, a lawyer or a doctor who makes $300,000, and we recompute all of this for that same person, that person is now getting 13% of their salary replaced, and their yield on investment is 2.8%. If we go back and we have very high wage people, $500,000, $600,000, et cetera, this yield number actually gets worse and worse. Remember what happens when this yield drops below inflation, right? When it drops below the 2%, what you're effectively talking about is this person, like literally they're getting such a bad deal, and I'd have to mentally think through the gymnastics of that. The point is there's a curve here. The more you make, the worse a deal it is. The more you make, the less of a percentage replacement is waiting there for you. I think this is very germane and important to young professionals today, and the reason why I say that is in about 20 years or so, whatever it is, the Social Security Administration is going to, I'm not going to say it's going to run out of money, but there's a whole conversation about solvency versus insolvency, and there's literally probably not going to be enough money being paid into the system to pay all of this benefit. And the people that they're going to decide don't need the benefit as much are the high wage earners. Now, I don't have a crystal ball to see off into the future. What I'm saying for you is, as a best case scenario, this is going to replace 29.5% of your then present value dollar income. And if they go and they decide that they need to reach out and claw back money to kind of make the system, keep the wheels keep turning, they're going to go after the people whose benefits are the highest, who need the money the less, who need the insurance against poverty the least. And my suspicion is they're going to go after high wage earners, and that means every single person in this room. Best case scenario, I believe, is 29.5%. Realistically, probably less. So I want to tell you the approach that I have taken to that. I have made the assumption for my personal retirement that Social Security does not exist and I will not receive it. That's my assumption. It's very cynical, it's very conservative. If it happens that Social Security, the Social Security program has problems, and they decide that they want to reach out and claw some back from people, my odds are that I'm going to be one of those people they'll go after, right? 20 plus years from now, when the program goes insolvent, I will be at retirement age. I will be one of the people who is right on the edge of retirement when the program hits like an inflection point where it runs below the line and runs out of its cash reserves. And so for my own personal safety, I am planning very conservatively that this benefit will not be there for me. I would recommend to all of you to just understand it. Understand the mechanics of what I'm putting there. Be educated about it. Be aware of it when you see it being talked about in the news. Because what I'm essentially talking about is your life between age 67 and the day that you decide to start pushing daisies. However many years you're going to be alive after you retire, I'm talking about roughly 30% of your standard of living. And there's a lot of uncertainty about it. So the reason why I do this conversation is to simply educate you on the basics of the calculations, how the system is administered, so that when you start hearing things in the news, you can understand kind of where it's coming from. Now, I've made a lot of gross assumptions here. I've made flatline assumptions about wage increases. I made flatline assumptions about inflation. I made assumptions about the adjustments to the bend points. These are gross assumptions, but it's illustrative. It's enough for a 45-minute conversation for you guys to understand kind of how all the numbers work. Okay? Now, you had a question? All right. We're essentially out of time, but I want to just take a moment and see if anybody has any questions. There's so much to this topic that I didn't cover. There are people who literally will spend their entire professional finance careers looking at this stuff. 45 minutes or so is not enough to do it, but it's enough to break the ice. Yes?
A lot of people that I talk to that are interested in getting self-employed.
Yes. Self-employment.
So if you're self-employed, and you didn't do one for that, but if you're self-employed, you pay the entire 12%.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. If you are self-employed, you are both the employee and the employer. So you're going to find if let's say you own your own business and your business pays you a paycheck, right? Let's say you have a small business and let's say you hire a payroll service and that payroll service is using your accounts and writing you a paycheck. What you're going to wind up seeing is they're going to generate the paycheck, they'll claw the 6.2% out of your pay, right? That your company that you own is paying you every week or 2 weeks or whatever. And then when the finance side, on the company side, when they do the payroll remissions to the Social Security Administration, right, that company is then going to have to do the matching. So if you own the company and you're paying yourself a conventional paycheck, you'll essentially see the 6.2% as any other employee would, and then as the owner of the company, when you do your corporate finances, and I don't know the mechanics of it, whether it's like every quarter or every year, whatever it is, but that's other 6.2%, you're going to see it come out. And so as the owner of the company, you're going to pay all 12.4%.
But you will, upon retirement, those years will constantly.
Oh, absolutely. You're earning as long as you're earning a W-2 wage. Okay? Now, if you take your income from a company in terms of, let's say, dividends, like let's say it's a C corporation and you own stock in the company, and you take no payroll paycheck, and you are not paying any payroll tax, this is a payroll tax. If you're not paying a payroll tax, then what's going to wind up happening is, like, at the end of the year, the company declares a dividend for the stock and pays, $100 per share, and you own 1,000 shares, so you get a dividend of $100,000. Yeah, you have to pay income tax on that dividend, but it was not a wage-based income. You paid no payroll tax on it. You have not contributed to Social Security, and therefore there is no benefit that exists in the database that shows that. All right, thank you. We're out of time.